So here in New York City, actually, you get taxed an extra 3% for actually having your home base here in New York. Now, before we dive in, just a quick reminder. This video is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and should not be considered financial advice. Our full disclaimer is shown here and on our website. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of us reacting to TikToks. So today we're actually going to be discussing two main items. The first one is retirement and investing. So that's the first piece that's going to come up on these videos. And of course, just like everyone knows, we need to make sure we have enough for our retirement, as well as investments that are going to keep our cash flow flowing once we're, out of work or, just fully retired. The next component is unique housing items, such as, hey, do I set up an LLC for my new house? Or do I start converting my home into a rental property? These are the kinds of questions we're going to answer today with these TikTok videos. So let's dive right in. This very first video is from a creator called Wes Headvisor. Let's see what he has to say about what you should have at each age category as you continue to invest in your future. So let's see what he has to say.
35. You need $50,000. That's right. See, now you're probably preparing. You probably want to get a home. You're going to need a down payment. So you should do that. All right. Age 45. You've grown now. You've grown. You need $150,000 saved. You're like, Wes, how is this possible? I don't know, man. Good savings decisions. That means you should aim to save at least 10% of your income. Keep your expenses low. The problem people do, they try to keep up with the Joneses. So you start buying things. This is when you have the Mercedes, when you could have been saving. This is when you have that luxury car that depreciate. But if you had invested that money, you would have been straight. Oh, you about to be even more shocked. Look at this, $300,000.
So he brings up a lot of great points. The first component that he mentioned is that at 35, hopefully you have at least 50 grand saved up, which in most cases, on average, most people have worked at least 10 years of their lives at this point. So if you're able to have at least 50,000, then you could even start thinking about, purchasing a home in your area. Now, the misconception that many people have is that just because you have only 50,000, which I know sounds, in some cases a lot, some cases a little, depending on your area, it doesn't mean that you have to put 20% down on a home. You can put as low as 3.5% or 4.5%, depending on which loan you take, such as FHA loans. So even if you have that component, at least you have the 50,000, then you can still get into a home. The other piece that he mentioned was keeping up with the Joneses. What this really means is lifestyle inflation. So as you earn more money, you start to think about, maybe that new car would be great. Or if you want to see, like, your neighbor just got a brand new, I don't know, Tesla or something, like a Tesla Cybertruck, you're like, I'm going to get that too. So sometimes it doesn't matter what others are doing. What's important is that you're making the right financial decisions for yourself.
1,000. That's at age 55, assuming that you remain at this salary, right? Hopefully you get more money, but at 3% raise on average, probably not. So you should have 300,000 saved by that time. And by the time you retire, $500,000 to $750,000. Now, this kind of falls short because you do need $1.5 million to retire, but this is at a $50,000 salary, which means you need to make more money. So holla at your boy. And if you're thinking, Wes, I'm nowhere near these things, well, you need to start saving money. Holla at your boy.
So these targets that he mentioned, he's right. Having a fund nowadays, especially at a retirement age of around 65, you're probably going to need between $1.5 to $2 million. And this is to live a very normal upbringing. So that's like having enough money for like rentals, or like if you had to rent an apartment or something, or having enough for food, which continues to skyrocket every day. All the essentials will be costing you roughly between $50,000 to $60,000 a year. And that's on average, depending on the area that you live in. So having $1.5 to $2 million is essential. One thing I would say, though, is that he mentions saving. So saving is great. However, I think the key component is not going to be how much you save, is going to be how much did you invest your savings. So that's going to be the key component here. And that's probably the missing piece that you're going to need for yourself to even have the money you need at the end of your retirement. Because just saving the money is just going to erode your money away, and you're not going to have much left at the end of your retirement. So let's dive right into the next one. This next one is from Austin Hankwitz. Let's see what he has to say about the right accounts that you need for your Roth IRA.
Everyone should have in their Roth IRA, starting with the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF VOO. This ETF tracks the total return of the S&P 500. It has a very low expense ratio and a 252% total return over the last 10 years. Now up next for number 2 is the Invesco QQQ Trust ETF QQQ. This is actually the fund you see on all those commercials with college football games, the really funny ones. Now, this one tracks the total return of the NASDAQ 100 index, and over the last 10 years, it's had a 451% total return. Now, finally, we have number 3, the NEOS Bitcoin High Income ETF, BTCI. In my opinion, this is the most responsible way to have exposure to Bitcoin in your retirement account because they offer monthly income. I would argue that Bitcoin is here to stay and that everyone should have it inside of their portfolio, so give it 5 to 15% exposure in your own portfolio moving forward. So between 252% over the last 10 years here, 450% over the last 10 years here, and probably some immense upside with Bitcoin over the coming decade, these 3 funds will definitely set your Roth IRA up for success. And this is my Instagram account where I repost all of my TikTok videos, so be sure to follow me over there as well.
So let's dive right into each of the funds that he mentioned. The first one is the S&P 500 Index Fund. So on average, usually this fund tends to give you 8 to 12% return on investment every year on average. That's why when he said there was around 252%, that is effectively over the 10-year period of these 8 to 12% on average returns. So on average, so there's going to be some years where you get 20%, some years where you only make like 6%. But overall, this is a pretty safe investment because the way the S&P 500 works is that as a new company becomes the next, top 500 company, then it gets added to the list. And any ones that fall out of the top 500 list, those are removed. So essentially, it is constantly being flowed as the top 500 company. The next one is the NASDAQ 100. Those are the top 100 companies. So essentially, as a company is in the top 100, then those companies are then removed from the list and then added. Similar to the S&P 500, except it's only tracking the top 100. The reason that this one has a higher return is because these are the big kahunas of the industry, the top 100 companies, on the market. And this is the reason, and they usually have the highest return, which means for you, if you have a high concentration in them, these will actually yield a higher return. Now, this does have some risk in the regard that if not that it will happen, but if a lot of these top 100 companies do fail, then that may have you have a lower return in a certain year. But overall, it seems that on record, it seems to be even stronger than the S&P 500 in terms of return on investments. Now, let's go on to Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, which is the last fund that he mentioned. This one is actually an interesting one because Bitcoin is something that is relatively new to the market in terms of investments compared to other things like stocks and real estate, for example. But due to its volatility, a lot of people tend to not invest in it, which leads to opportunity. Because as you can see, Bitcoin just recently, actually, to my understanding, actually went over to like 100 grand in valuation. And that's because of, regulations and things like this that our new administration actually talked about and is making the Bitcoin market a lot more favorable. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to put your entire life savings into Bitcoin or to cryptocurrency, but having at least a portion of it could have you take a piece of these returns that are currently be seen on the market. And overall, it is something that is going to be with us for at least for the remaining future, because Bitcoin is being seen as something that's going to be an alternative currency at one point as well. One thing I did want to add is that there is something else that people can invest in, which is a real estate investment trust or REITs. This is actually a good way also to invest, and you can actually put this in your IRA as well. And what effectively this does is that you can actually invest in rental properties that are owned by others. And as rental income comes in, you actually are paid. And also most of these REITs also increase in value because, of course, as houses and rental properties increase in value, then your REIT will also increase in value. So let's dive right into the next one. This next one is from budgeters_anonymous. Let's see what he has to say about if you are, of course, making at least $33 an hour, how you should budget this puppy.
All right, this is the amount of money that you want to be saving every single month. First, we're going to assume you're working 40 hours every single week, which means that you'll be making $1,320 per week, or about $68,640 per year. Your tax rate will probably be somewhere around 25%. Of course, it's going to vary depending on what state that you're in, which means that you're basically making about $52,000 per year, or about $4,333 per month. When you're budgeting, you always want to base your budget off of this number. This is the money that you're actually getting. A healthy and realistic budget to follow is the 50-30-20 budget. It's a really simple budget. It just means that 50% of your money goes towards your needs, 30% goes to whatever the heck you want, and that you save 20%. Unless you want to be working for your entire life, you want to make sure that you're at least saving 20% of your income, which in this case is $866 per month. And look, for some of you, thinking about your life 30 years from now is probably going to make you feel a little bit bored. Remember, this budget is accounting for the fact that you can spend 30% on whatever you want. So if you want to retire sooner, pull from what your wants is. If you want to go on a vacation, well, save some of this money from your wants bucket. Lastly, if you are in debt, well, that $866 should just go straight to paying off your debt. That way you can easily stick to this 50-30-20 budget.
So this is actually a great point, an overall very important piece to understand. When you're budgeting and you have something, so in this case, he went over something that was like $33 an hour. And the reason that your budget may actually vary by state is because certain states will have different taxation based on local jurisdictions. So a very simple comparison would be New York City. New York City has triple taxes, so you get taxed by the city, the state, and the federal government. However, if you live in upstate New York, you only get taxed by the state and the federal government. So depending on where you're located, you might actually incur an additional tax percentage. So here in New York City, actually you get taxed an extra 3% for actually having your home base here in New York. So that's just to get into that component of why he mentioned it varies by state. And there might even also be some states that actually don't charge any tax, like Florida. Florida has no state tax, for example. So now going back to his budgetary piece, he mentioned that only 50% of your income should be going into your, basically, your needs, as essentially like what you need to pay. So what he meant by that is like your rental income, your food, your utilities, basically anything you need to survive. So think of it as like the basic needs of survival. Now, when he said the wants, that's where it gets a little bit dicey. Wants are more like, just like you mentioned, vacations. Maybe you want to buy a new video game. Maybe you want to go out to fancy dinners. Some people may argue that, hey, fancy dinners are more like, you need that. It's not a need. It's a want because you effectively probably don't want to cook at home, for example. In some cases, of course, if you live on your own and you need to do that, that's fine. But in some cases, if you have help and you're able to do it, then try to focus more on cooking at home if possible. Now, the savings piece, which is the 20%, that percentage, depending on what you do, could be enough to at least get you, in a good place. However, if possible, shifting from not just what your needs bucket is, but also from your wants bucket. Sometimes if you can shift from both of these, that could optimize effectively your savings. So sometimes just because you have a current need doesn't mean that your needs can't shift. So an easy example of this is like, hey, I have a rental, I'm renting right now for $3,000. Just because you're renting currently for $3,000 does not mean that you can't adjust this need. And a lot of common ways that people will adjust this need is by doing something called house hacking, which basically means that you'll live with roommates, which I know sounds inconvenient, but it will minimize your 50% bucket and probably lower to like maybe 40 or 30%, depending on how much you pay, of course, a rent. So just because you have the mindset of like, hey, it's a need in your mind, doesn't mean you need to stick to that. You sometimes should focus on like, how can I decrease my expenses in both my wants and need bucket in order to maximize my savings and my investing. So let's move on to the next one. This one is from Real Mortgage Mentor, and he's going to talk about how much money do you need to actually buy a house that's worth roughly $420,000 to $20,000.
$20,000 home, here's how much you need to make in order to afford it. So we're making some assumptions here. FHA financing, you know, that's my favorite. 640 FICO score. FHA is very forgiving with lower FICO scores. 5.99 interest rate, APR below. Here's our target, $420,000. So always going to be going for 3.5% down if we're doing FHA. It just makes everything easier in the long scheme of things to have that safety padding. That's going to run you $14,700 just for the down payment. And then I'm going to estimate closing costs at about $9,000 given this home. So that's going to put us at $23,700 cash to close. Our monthly payment, and no HOA, I'm not tossing that in there. We'll assume a single family home. That total payment is going to be $3167 PITI. Your PITI is your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance to qualify. And let's put some debt in here. Let's make it a little tougher for ourselves. Let's say $750 a month. So if we add all that together, we would need to be making $6,900 a month as far as income. Nice. And this would be FHA approved. Send me a DM if you have any questions.
So he actually brought up a lot of great points, but he did forget to mention one aspect. The first thing is he forgot to mention that with an FHA, you do need to have mortgage insurance, because if you have less than 20% of a down payment, you have to have mortgage insurance. And the thing about an FHA, which is very important to understand, is that the mortgage insurance never goes away. Never, ever, ever. So essentially, you have to pay that mortgage insurance for the rest of the loan until you decide to refinance the loan. So if you refinance the loan and pay off the FHA, then the mortgage insurance is gone. Now, one thing I will say about FHA is the low down payment is great. And usually FHA in most cases is for first-time home buyers. The other good thing about FHA is that even though, of course, it has the mortgage insurance, you can purchase a home up to 4 units. So you can actually purchase a multifamily as well using an FHA, and it can have up to 4 units. And so effectively, you could rent out the 3 units, and that could be used to pay off your loan. Of course, there's not a lot out there that are 4 units, but if you can get at least 2 or 3 units, then that'll definitely help with your monthly payments and help you also get to the point when you refinance that your principal balance is much lower. So overall, the reason that he's, by the way, the final component that I saw here is that the reason he said you need around $6,900 is because you need at least 2 times your, the monthly payment in order to actually be able to qualify for an FHA. So if your FHA payments plus, let's say, debt is around $4,000 or three-ish change, then you need at least usually 2x that amount in order to actually get an FHA. Alrighty, we're gonna end it here. So that was Reacting to TikToks episode 8. I hope everyone out there has a blessed day, and adios. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing an amazing job, and I'm wishing everyone out there all the best. Alright, until next time, adios.